what is the location of the emergency?
You're going to think I'm crazy, that I'm under demonic attack.
Stop where you're at.
There's rocks flying through windows. There's stuff breaking in my house like nothing I've ever seen. You may not believe in that, but you would if you were here.
Paranormal Patrol Podcast.
All right, welcome back to another episode of Paranormal Patrol Podcast. This will be for season 2.
That's right.
Our second year doing this. Yes. And right off the bat, we have a very talented and prolific author, J.D. Barker, who the very first novel, Forsaken, was already wildly received. I believe it was ranked number 2 on Audible, like number 44 or 43 on Amazon US, and like number 2 Amazon Canada, wasn't it?
Yeah. It was such a great book. I always thought that those that are very successful, they always have a story about how they sell everything, get rid of all their stuff, and they go all in. And that's what it sounds like you did.
Yeah, I mean, it's funny because I think I got comfortable, like when you've got a nice corporate gig, you've got that big paycheck coming in, like even though I dreaded going to work every day, I hated every second of it. It was paying for that lifestyle, and it gets harder and harder to walk away. I mean, when you've got a big mortgage payment,
Yes.
you've got car payments to make, the idea of getting, walking away from that is scary. So like, it was my wife that twisted my arm. Like she pushed me into doing that. Without her support, I'd probably still be working the corporate job.
Yeah.
That's good to have that support because it's got to be hard, right? I mean, you're doing it, you're working, and then you're coming home and working again. So,
Yeah, I mean, even then, like I sat down, I had the basic idea for Forsaken. I knew what I was going to write, but it takes me about, now I can knock out a book in about 3 months. Back then, it took me about 6 to 8 or so. But that's a long time to go, without knowing where your next paycheck is going to come, and then even you get an agent, you publish it, and you still don't know what's going to happen. So it was sketchy times for sure.
yeah, really. I have a friend that's a author, and I never realized how hard it was to get a fiction book publicized sometimes. And then, of course, if you miss the ship date, then I guess it gets pushed back to the next print date or something like that. So, yeah, you've really got to be.
Yeah, things can get crazy. So my next book that's coming out, something I keep upstairs, it went through, a million people read the beta copies, looked over the text and all this other stuff. Somehow a typo ended up on the cover, the jacket of the hardcover. They repeated the letter I in the word in like twice. So it had I-I-N. But it went through like they literally printed the first run of the book before somebody caught it. So luckily somebody over at Simon & Schuster spotted it at that point. But then they had to scramble. They had to reprint all the jackets, and try to get them to the warehouse, and they had to swap them out on every cover, every hardcover that was already printed.
Oh, no.
They got it done, but it pushed us back about a week. Luckily there's a little bit of a cushion built into that release schedule.
Right.
But it could have delayed the entire thing.
Well, I'll tell you, I still read a lot of books. Obviously, working for the library, I go through a lot of books. And it's not usual for me to pick up somebody's first published writing and be so vested in it that I actually lose sleep because I'm staying up too late reading. And Forsaken did it for me. That was such a good book. I'm dying to wait for your release. I think May is when you're releasing something I keep upstairs.
Yeah, May 13th. I'm really looking forward to this one too. I love writing horror. I love books that just scare you. I mean, the first book that I ever wrote that I considered to be an adult title was Dracula. I found a copy of it at a garage sale with my mom. It was 25 cents. It was sitting on top of the box, and like I picked it up. I figured there's no way my mom's going to let me buy this because it just looked too scary. But she let me buy it, and like I read it, really fast, and then I, slept with the lights on for like the next 3 weeks. Trying to process what, because I had always read. I mean, I'd been reading my entire life up until that point, but I never had a book that brought out that kind of an emotional reaction that like literally freaked me out to the point where I had to leave the lights on. And I've been chasing that feeling ever since, trying to write it into my own books.
So how cool was it then? Because I read that after you published Forsaken, I believe Stoker's great-great-grandson reached out to you?
Yeah, it was Dacre Stoker, Bram's great-grandnephew. Forsaken got nominated for Best Debut of a Horror Novel with the StokerCon convention, the Horror Writers Convention. So I was there to accept the award, and at one point we had to do a book signing, and they sat me next to Dacre Stoker, which was awesome. I picked his brain on everything I could related to Dracula and Bram Stoker. And he started asking me about my early years working as a book doctor and a ghostwriter and basically writing for other people. It was a great conversation, and I figured that's all it was. But he pulled me aside a day later, and he said, listen, I have to admit, before we sat down, I knew who you were. And my family had read Forsaken. We really like your writing style. We like your history. And we've been trying to find somebody to write a prequel to Dracula for a while now, using Bram's original notes. Is that something you'd be interested in doing? And obviously the answer to that is yes. It's always yes. So I jumped all over that. That was a crazy project. We had so much fun.
I can only imagine, especially, I didn't know that Dracula was, your first foray into horror, and that was just so cool.
Yeah, it's one of those weird books. It's been with me my entire life. I've read it more times than I can count. And as I get older, I'm 54 now. It's like you pick up little differences and, different nuances. It means different things to you at different ages.
Right.
But just the writing style, the way it's put together, the story itself. I mean, he literally created a legend. And in today's world, like, Dracula is the second most bought book in the world next to the Bible, all these years later.
Yeah.
Well, it's kind of our Bible, though.
Right. Yeah, for sure. Yeah.
Yeah.
I had just got through reading Forsaken, and then I picked up another book, a fantasy book, who published her book a year after Forsaken, and there was such a similarity between a character in the book and your witch from Forsaken. Not only was the name very similar, but even down to the clacking of the nails and her description of the nails.
Well,
yeah.
I guess imitation is the best form of flattery, isn't that?
Exactly.
Yeah.
And I thought to
I guess
myself, I was like, what are the odds I'm going to read this back to back? I mean, so he's got something going on.
If you're first to the table, it's your idea. I mean, I guess it's always cool. Like I see so much of that. And honestly, like I like, like it really is flattering to see somebody that likes whatever you did so much that they're willing to do that. But it happens to all of us. Like, I don't know if you read, do you read Frida McFadden at all?
No, I did not.
She's a
That's actually on my girlfriend's shelf as we speak.
Yeah, so she's got a new book called The Crash, and like a lot of the online chatter said this is very similar to Misery. So next thing you know, I saw a picture of Stephen King walking into a bookstore buying a whole bunch of Frida McFadden titles.
That's awesome.
Yeah. So he's looking at it, but there's only so many original stories. You can kind of see on, I don't know if your viewers can see video or not.
They will on YouTube. Yes.
Glass case. Okay. So there's a glass case behind me. I'm pointing at it right now. Those are the original pages for Needful Things off Stephen King's typewriter.
Man.
It's one of my all-time favorite books. But Needful Things is actually based on a Ray Bradbury short story, almost identical concept, so even Stephen King is mining, material that came out before him and, just looking at ways to make it better. I know when The Shining came out, they almost didn't publish it because it was so similar to a book called Burnt Offerings, which later became a movie.
Yeah.
That they were going to hold The Shining back. In the publisher's eyes, they were similar. I've read both, and like other than both, both being haunted house type stories, like I don't really see
right.
It,
okay.
But like it almost held up the publication of that book.
Man,
that's it. Yeah, and I guess they say there's no such thing as like original, or no such thing as an original idea or something like that. So
I know. I mean, I would think it would be intellectual property. If people would start trying to sue for this stuff.
Well,
if you think about, like, I have analyzed pretty much every big name author out there and looked at how they got to where they are. And if you look at Stephen King, what he's basically done, he's taken all the tropes. So Carrie was about psychokinesis. His next book, Salem's Lot, there's vampires. Then you've got The Shining, which is a haunted house story. You got Pet Sematary, which is a zombie story. He basically took every trope that already existed and had existed forever in horror and just did it better. Came up with an original take on it.
Yeah, he's kind of the J.R. Tolkien of the horror world.
Yeah, I would say so.
Yeah. If you're going to write horror, you're probably going to touch something he wrote.
Yeah. So let's most of your books, I mean, the readers are just hooked, like when you're writing, like how do you get the paranormal elements, balance that with the realism of what's going on with the supernatural element to get people just hooked? Like how do you do that?
It's funny because when you're writing it, like you're so close to it, it all feels like garbage. Like, like I personally feel like every sentence, I don't know what I'm doing. I can't believe I just wrote that. I think it's because it moves so much slower when you're actually writing it. If I put it aside for a little bit, go back to it a week or two later and read it fresh, those feelings go away. I mean, for me, like I think the key to it, and even when I read stuff, is like it needs to feel real. So you can include a witch, you can include ghosts, you can include any of these things, but it needs to feel like something that could happen, to your next door neighbor in real life, and they are basically telling you that story. Like every book I write, I more or less write for my wife, and in my mind, I picture myself almost sitting across a campfire, telling her, one person, this particular story, and it needs to come across as realistic, something that could happen. And I think that's when it really works with readers. I mean, I love reading fantasy and things like that, but like if I were to write a fantasy novel, like dragons, I would have to explain, why they are in that book, and it would have to come across in a way that's realistic. Like there's an old movie called Reign of Fire with Matthew McConaughey.
Yeah.
I don't know if you remember that movie, but they're digging I think a subway tunnel or something like that in our day London. Like to me, that is perfect because, it seems extremely plausible. I could see myself turning on the news, and see Tom Brokaw up there going, "Hey, dragon just flew out in London." Damn glad that didn't happen here in New York.
Right.
But like that realism, like that's what it takes, I think, because then that's when you close the cover as a reader, and you're like, like that's why you have to keep the lights on.
Yeah.
And I will keep going back to Forsaken, and I promise you, we'll talk about your new book, but I geeked out on Forsaken so bad. I actually read it 1.5 times. And the only reason it was a half was because I got busy doing the podcast stuff, and it was time for me to get ready for the next season. But, and I saw some of the Irish folklore that was in there, with some of the names and things like that. But the witch you did such a good job weaving the story. I found myself second guessing and third guessing. Is she the witch? Is she innocent? Is there somebody else? And right when I would think I had it, then I guessed myself again. But it was such a realistic character that, as weird as it sounds, I was like, I almost want to meet this girl, because how she would appear to
London, and they open up a big cave and a dragon flies out and
people and lure them in.
I'm pretty sure you don't.
Yeah. Hey, so let's talk about your new book coming out. Would you care to discuss with our listeners what that's about and the premise behind it?
Yeah. So this one was crazy fun. So let me ask you a question. If you're 17 years old, you're in high school, your grandmother dies, and she leaves you a house on a private island, in her will, what are you guys going to do with it?
Dude, that's
Party,
17, yes.
get some friends.
Party, exactly. You're going to turn it into a party house, right? So, your friends are going to come out, you're going to drink, you're going to have fun, you're going to do all the things that you can't do, back home because everybody is constantly watching you. So that's essentially the premise of this book. This kid, he just finds out that, he had a grandmother. He wasn't close to her in any way. She passes away, and she leaves him a house on a private island. It's about a quarter mile off the coast of where he actually lived, out where nobody really knew what was going on out there. So they do exactly that. They go out there, they throw some parties, but after a while, even that gets bored, and somebody raises their hand and says, "Hey, what would it take to make this house haunted? Like take a normal house and turn it into a haunted house." So they do exactly what you would expect. There's a couple scary stories. They break out the Ouija board, but the tagline for the book is, "For a haunted house to be born, somebody has to die."
Yes.
So you know where they're going. But a book like this is all about the journey. So it was a fun book for me to write. But the coolest aspect of the whole thing is I live on an island in New England, right off the coast of Portsmouth, called Newcastle. And I go for a run every day. I do a lap around the island. It's 4.2 miles.
Good God.
And at one point, when I'm standing out on the beach, I can look out across the water and I see Wood Island, which is the house that is actually in my book. So I based a story on a real life haunted house that's a quarter mile off my coast. I took as much, factual data as I could find, weave that together with the local lore, because people have been talking about this place since the 1600s. And mashed it all together in this book. And, like I mentioned earlier, it takes me about 3 months to write a book. This one actually took me 4 years from start to finish, because I kept running into these things that would scare me to the point where I had to push that book aside and just kind of go and work on something else for a little while and then come back to it. It's by far the scariest thing I've ever read.
Okay.
So they're all familiar with it. They've seen it, but it's far enough.
For you saying that, for our listeners, I
Yeah.
think we have to ask, like, what kind of things? Like real, imagined?
Yeah, I mean, there's been sightings on the island forever. Like the house was abandoned for the longest time, but people still saw lights turning on and off in there. They saw the people walking on the beach. You can't get to it. Like I said, you have to take a boat to get to it. You can't swim to it. Like the water is actually infested with great white sharks.
shoot.
Because it's a little inland and it's warmer. So like the fish and the seals and stuff come in. And the sharks, they follow. So like, it's very difficult to get to. A lot of rock in the water. So you have to understand exactly how to navigate to get to it. So people just sort of stay away. But they've constantly seen stuff out there. There's tons of reports locally about a little girl just being on the beach, which makes no sense. Like, why would a little girl be on the beach? And some people have attributed her to a little girl that drowned in somebody's well, hundreds of years ago back here on Newcastle on the mainland. So, a lot of stuff like that. When I started digging, I learned that the place had been used as a quarantine zone during yellow fever. They used to just put people out there if they had yellow fever.
Wow.
So lots. Okay. Yeah. Suffering and death.
Yeah. During the Spanish-American War, they used to dock ships out there. So if they captured a Spanish vessel, they would force them to dock out on Wood Island. They wouldn't let them off the boat, and they would literally starve them out. They would keep everybody on that boat until they either died of starvation or disease. And then they would take the boat because that's all they really cared about. The bodies would go overseas, feed the sharks, and then, those were gone. So like, I found all these things throughout history, but the one that really got me is back in 1972, somebody had boated out there for a picnic on the beach. And they found 2 bodies buried in the sand, and they were just skeletons at this point, but they found him out there. And because of where the island is, it's right on the it's like right in the middle of Maine and New Hampshire, like literally right on the border in the water. So everybody basically pointed fingers at each other. Like it was kind of a hot potato. Nobody wanted this case. So, local law enforcement on the Maine side said, no, you take it. The guys over on the New Hampshire side were, you guys take it. Ultimately, they called in the FBI, and the FBI took the case. I found one newspaper article about it, and they summed up everything. They summed up the bodies. There's pictures of, the people standing out there, the district attorney at the time. So I know that it happened in real life, but I contacted all these law enforcement agencies, and absolutely nobody's got a file on it. None of the local police departments have any information on it. I reached out to the local FBI office. They have no record of it, even though there's photographs of an FBI agent standing out there. Which I found to be really, really weird. The DA in the picture, I actually found him in real life. He's still practicing law privately now. He said he had no recollection of any of it. But I mean, can you imagine being an attorney standing on a beach, literal photograph of it from the 1970s, so he was there? That's not something you forget. So like, it almost screams conspiracy, and like, I don't want to go there, but like, it just doesn't make any sense for all these law enforcement agencies to not have any kind of record of it.
And it's not like they could Photoshop it in there back in the day. So
yeah, no, exactly.
So I
just dug up tons of strange stuff like that related to
that's wild.
And you submitted a FOIA to the FBI and nothing came back?
I phoned a
Okay,
friend.
gotcha. Yeah.
At this point, like, I've got, when you write thrillers, you get to know somebody from basically every one of the letter agencies.
Okay.
So I've got people I can call.
Okay.
So they just keyed in. I mean, maybe it's in a box somewhere and there's no digital record of it, who knows?
Yeah.
Like, I can't imagine 2 bodies just vanishing.
Right.
Yeah.
Because that's essentially what happened.
Yeah.
I could see the DA. I could see a DA saying, yeah, I don't remember, just because he doesn't want to be involved in any sort of talking about it. But
Right.
Yeah.
Right. But he's going to remember. Like,
yes.
He's trying to.
Absolutely.
He's taking a step backwards as slow as he possibly
That
can.
is a lot of cool stuff about that. And this is the island that's on your promotional giveaway, right? So that's the same island, same house.
Yeah, so that same island, same house. So I got to know the people. The last thing that it actually was in real life was a Coast Guard life-saving station.
Oh,
no.
And this is years and years ago. So it was basically left out there to rot. The house was falling apart. It was filled with bats. There was about a foot worth of bat guano, just like on the floor, like when this guy found it. So basically a local guy discovered or decided he was going to renovate it. So he just raised capital, brought in a bunch of investors, and they got the money together to basically bring this place back to life. And I've gotten to know him over the years. So he's taken me out on his boat a couple of times during the construction of this. And it's taken years to bring this place back. But now they're at the tail end of it. And what's cool is they're decorating the interior of the house to match the descriptions that I put in the book. So they're basically buying the
That's
furniture
cool.
that I had in the book. So yeah, so when you walk in there, like, you are literally walking into the haunted house.
That's so awesome.
Yeah, that's cool. Now, let me ask, have you ever experienced anything at that location?
Well, I'm one of those guys that, like, I'm smart enough to understand there's a lot I don't understand. So like the first time that he took me out to Wood Island, it was before I researched anything, before I knew anything about the history. And like, I walked into the house with him, and like, the hair on the back of my neck was standing up. Like, I wanted to get out. Like, something instinctual was telling me, like, you do not want to be here. And like I try to find ways to explain this. Like if you were in a room with a cat and like something makes a noise in the corner of the room, that cat is going to just bolt. It doesn't care what made the
Right.
noise. It doesn't want to know. It's just gone.
Yeah.
But people are stupid. Like we will stand there. We'll walk over to that corner. We'll start sniffing around. Hey, what was that? Like we just, I think on an instinctual level, like we have trained ourselves to ignore these things that, were prevalent, years and years back. We've trained it out of ourselves. And we probably should learn to listen to it a little bit. So like every time I have gone out to this house, I have felt that same feeling. And it's just in the house. I can go outside, I can walk around on the island and I'm totally fine. But when I'm in the house, it creeps me out. Everything we could to just, scare something up. At one point we were down in the basement reading scary stories to each other at midnight, standing next to the boiler, just waiting for something to happen. Nothing happened. Our very last night there, my wife and I woke up. It was like maybe 9 a.m. Sun's coming in the windows and we're laying on top of the bed trying to figure out what we're going to do with the day. And all of a sudden the bed just starts to shake and not just shake. It felt like somebody grabbed it and was just like shaking it as hard as they possibly could. And this went on for almost a minute, about 30 seconds to a minute. And like we're looking over the sides, trying to figure out what could possibly be causing it. There was no noise involved. There was no mechanical sound. We weren't close to the elevator, so there was no way to explain what could possibly be doing it. It wasn't scary. It was just so weird that we didn't understand. We went down to the lobby and we told the manager what happened. And he said, "Oh yeah, the bed in that room does that."
What?
Like that was his explanation, and they've got these weird things that happen all around that particular hotel. So again, like I feel like there's something out there. I think we just don't understand it. I've talked to a lot of people who feel, life is energy and energy has to go somewhere. So if somebody passes away, that they don't just disappear, that energy has to go someplace. So, what happens if a lot of people pass away in the same place, which is essentially what happened on this island and around this island? If you think of a battery, it could still be stored.
Right. And it also depends on how it happened, like tragic acts, murders. That energy doesn't even know it's probably dead.
Yeah.
It happened so quick,
Right.
Gun to the back of the head, you're gone. Now that energy's going somewhere, and that's how spirits start roaming. They have no clue that they're gone, and that's what we've came across with a lot of times, depending on what's happened at the location. And yeah, it's definitely about the energy for sure.
Yeah. Agreed.
Yeah.
Yeah. Go ahead.
No, but
Oh yeah, no, I just had another question. Are there any paranormal legends or real life mysteries that you've been dying to explore for like another book, probably, or just for your own, just for your own self?
I get fascinated by that stuff. Any unsolved mystery in general tends to rope me in. Years back, I went to my 20-year high school reunion, and I learned that a friend of mine had been murdered in Tampa. And her case was cold. Her body was found at the back of a sweeping company parking lot, buried in a shallow grave. She'd been stabbed a whole bunch of times, and her body had been there for about 3 weeks, so it was pretty decomposed when they actually found her. The case went completely cold, and I learned about this at my reunion. I went home and just took it upon myself to solve this case. And long story short, I ended up solving it. It took me about 4 days after I got to Tampa to put it all together. And it was this crazy thing. Like, we figured out who killed her, why they killed her, how they killed her. We got all the details together, gave it all to the lead detective. And every time we gave him a piece of information, he seemed to screw it up. Like we found the car that her body was transported in. Like he went out to the car and just, rather than calling a CSU unit in or CSI to investigate this car, he did it himself.
Yeah.
He processed
man.
the car on his own. The next day, the car was stolen.
Oh.
When we found the house. We found the house where she was murdered, and we told him about what happened. He went in there with CSI, and he had them investigate a different bedroom. Like we knew specifically where she was stabbed and where she bled out. He pointed them to a different room in the house, and the homeowner was actually standing over his shoulder going, "No, it's that room, it's that room." He refused to let him into that room. This kept happening over and over and over again, and I couldn't figure out why. And about 2 years later, it finally all came together. So in Tampa at the time, if you passed away by natural causes, let's say in a hospital, the hospital would file the necessary paperwork to code you as deceased, like the IRS mainframe and things like that stop all your, all that type of activity. If you died of unnatural causes, if it was a homicide, it was up to the lead detective to actually file that paperwork. So this guy, rather than filing that paperwork for his homicide victims, he kept them alive and he filed tax returns on them year after year after year and collected all this tax revenue. So at one point he was bringing in, I think the last year they said it was $422,000 he brought in fraudulent tax returns. His wife worked for the prison system, so she would turn this money that came into these debit cards that they used at the prison, and then they would sell the debit cards for 50 cents on the dollar. So that's how they laundered it. So I solved my friend's murder, but uncovered this entire conspiracy that was happening with the lead detective. And like that for a while there, I thought I was going to go into witness protection because I didn't know who was involved. So when all this happened,
wild.
My wife is like,
Yeah.
she knew that I enjoyed doing this sort of thing, but at the same time, it's freaking dangerous.
Right.
You ain't lying, especially when you get close. When you start getting close.
Yeah, when you get close, and like if there's law enforcement actually involved, that was a pretty scary time for me. So like I took a step back from all of it, but I absolutely love doing that kind of thing. I spent a lot of time working on cold cases and working with police departments and things like that. Because authors' minds, we tend to think about things outside the box.
Right.
We tend to come up with concepts that maybe they hadn't considered. We can bring just a new theory into a case. So I've done quite a bit of that.
Well, that's pretty cool. What an awesome, that's gotta be an awesome feeling that you actually solved the cold case like that.
Yeah. I've worked on a bunch of them. I mean, it's always rewarding, but that the danger factor is there. And now I've got a daughter. So I've got to think about that. And it's time to step back and just take work on the.
And just keep scaring
Can't
us.
get in trouble writing.
Yeah. So with this book, then, is it all horror, or is it a mix of horror and crime, or something I keep upstairs?
It's primarily a thriller with a lot of horror elements.
Okay.
In it. So on the cover, we actually call it a chiller, which is a term I stole from Peter Straub years ago. Because I write thrillers primarily. That's what I'm known for. I write a lot of books with James Patterson, but they're primarily thrillers, and I'll just include elements of sci-fi, elements of horror. Basically, I just use suspense as like a common thread because it keeps the readers coming back. If I go too far off the rails, I don't know if my normal audience would read it. So this is really a thriller, but it's a scary thriller.
I know. I can't wait. I love a good haunted house style story with just a little bit of mystery in it. I love that's my kind of book.
Now, did James Patterson go in with this book with you too? The new one coming out?
No, this was a solo one. The last book, we just had a book come out called The Writer. It came about 2 weeks ago and debuted at number 2 on the New York Times list. That's the last one we've had published. That's number 5. We're currently working on a new one right now. I've always been his go-to guy when he comes up with a scary idea. So we've done, we have one called Death of the Black Widow, which is pretty frightening. Another one called Confessions of the Dead, which is pretty scary. But the Writer was a straight up thriller. The one we're working on now is a straight up thriller.
Okay.
So
yeah. I read The Noise. I enjoyed The Noise. That was a good one. Now,
yeah, it's a good example of that. So he came up with, some unique idea, take on horror. And I didn't think you could come up with something original.
Right.
It felt like everything had been done before, but he did it. And like I said, to copy to Stephen King, and King was even like, damn, he did it. He came up with something new. So King actually gave us a blurb on that book, which was funny because like Stephen King and Patterson have always butted heads. Like they don't really like each other.
wow.
But
Interesting.
He liked it enough to give us a blurb, which was awesome.
Yeah. And now, how did you and Patterson meet?
Well, when you have like my second book was called The Fourth Monkey. It's about a serial killer in Chicago, and that was published by HMH, which is HarperCollins now. Whenever that happens, they mail out advance copies to all the big name authors, just hoping to get the blurb, the one sentence for the back, greatest book ever.
Okay.
By so and so New York Times bestseller. So a copy landed on Patterson's desk, and he liked it enough where he picked up the phone and called me to basically give me his review of the book. And we talked for a good half hour or so, and I told him that I'm in Florida quite a bit. He lived in Palm Beach. So the next time I went down to Florida, we ended up meeting up for lunch, and we just discussed the idea of actually working together. And it was supposed to be a one-off project. We weren't expecting it to go anywhere. And at first I wasn't sure if it was going to happen at all because I was what they call a pantser. I basically come up with my plot, my characters, mix it all in together and just kind of write the story. I've got no idea where it's going. I just, what the characters kind of tell me. And he's a well-known outliner. He comes up with 30 to 40 pages of an outline before he starts writing a book. So the styles are just so different. We didn't think we'd be able to work together. So when I left that lunch, I didn't expect to hear back from him. But he called me a couple months later, and he's like, you know what? Let's go ahead and try and pants a novel. Let's try it your way. So we literally went back and forth. I would write a chapter. I would paint him into some kind of impossible, crazy scenario, thinking he's never going to get out of this. And 15 minutes later, he'd send me pages back, and not only did he get out of it, but he put me in an even
Oh,
worse
no,
spot.
that's awesome.
Man.
So like so it was like the twistiest book I've ever written, because we just kept trying to one up each
Right.
other, and we kept getting each other out. We would get out of it. So we had a lot of fun with that. And then the next one we did was The Noise, and he said, let's try it my way. And he sent me an outline for that one. Honestly, he converted me. I've been using outlines ever since.
Okay.
That's pretty cool. Both of you stepped out of your comfort zone and your norms to accommodate it and work together.
Yeah, I mean that's half the fun with being a writer. I love to do different things all the time. I mean, like right below those pages from Stephen King, there's a typewriter. So I've got a novel that I'm writing on that. Every day I just kick out a sentence or two. I've got another one I'm writing in longhand on a notepad. And I find that my voice is different, depending on the medium I use, which keeps it, interesting for me and hopefully interesting for the reader.
Yeah,
Oh, yeah, for
that's
sure.
pretty dang
Yeah.
cool.
I'll tell you, JD, you and Patterson, man, you guys put out some bangers, man. You got some good books.
The library system I work for is the Mid-Continent Public Library System, and I don't think they care if I put their name out on the radio. But last summer, James Patterson came and he did a presentation here because we have 34 branches. So we're a huge library system. And the chaos leading up to his arrival was just monstrous. I'm a software developer. And so I was having to make adjustments to the software for the timing and everything of the release and how we're going to handle it. And from the moment we opened registration, so many people flooded it that it's crashed our servers. Within 10 minutes, we were sold out. I felt like we were Ticketmaster. And I was like, we can't handle this load. But it was so well received. That would be awesome if you came and did something like that. I mean, I think it'd be so well. I think it'd be sold out.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah.
Oh, I'd love to come out there. I mean, it's like when you hang out with them, it's literally like that all the time.
Yeah.
Like if you go to lunch, like there's a line of people behind the waiter or waitress trying to get to that table, to introduce themselves or tell you what their favorite Patterson book was. He's just recognizable.
Right.
Like I can walk out into public, like if I'm at a book fair or someplace like that, the hair kind of gives me away. But like I can go to the grocery store. He can't go to the grocery store. Like that's a whole other level of fame. I talked him into being the keynote speaker at Author Nation this year in November, out in Vegas.
Okay.
That's
very
gonna be a
cool.
fun
But yeah,
time.
not to sell yourself short either, though, because I think some of your works there have movie options, don't they?
I've got 8 different books in what I call various stages of Hollywood hell. So like this one's got a director, this one's got a star, this one's got a writer, this one doesn't have a writer. The director just left this one. We hired somebody
Oh,
new.
no.
It's like it's this constant roller coaster of craziness always going on. And nothing's been filmed
Nothing.
yet. But like I said, 8 different
Wow.
ones. Hollywood is tough. Somebody once told me if you watch the credits at the end of a movie, 6 minutes of names flying by. Every single person on that list had to be there for that movie to get to the screen. You take one of them away and all of a sudden the project falls apart. It doesn't happen.
Wow.
Patterson told me, like Patterson wrote that book with Bill Clinton, the president.
Yeah.
Showtime scooped it up in a big option payment. They started filming, they got 4 episodes in, and then COVID hit, shut the entire production down, and they never finished it. So like it's in the can.
Oh.
That happens quite a bit. Even the new Salem's Lot movie that just came out with Stephen King, like they took a tax write-off on that. They had no plans to ever release it. Which is it's horrible. Like to think, you go through that entire process, the movie is done, finished, and it's sitting there and it's never going to get out. Catwoman
sucks.
is another one. That's been shelved by the studios, and it's never going to see the light of day unless it sneaks out somehow.
Somebody's gonna steal. Somebody's gonna steal the edit
man.
and release it.
Yeah, like I don't like to discount that because I can see somebody walking out the door and all of a sudden it's on YouTube a day
Yeah.
later.
Yeah.
In today's world, you never know.
That's crazy.
Man,
I didn't
that
know the world.
sounds like a heartbreak hell to authors.
Oh yeah, let me give you an example. So I've got a book called A Caller's Game. It's I think like my 6th or 7th book that I put out. At this point, I'd gotten a little cocky because everything had gotten optioned to that point. So I'm writing this book. I'm like, I'm going to write a book that they can't film just to see what happens. So as soon as my agent put it out there, Ridley Scott's company scooped it up. So like it was going to get filmed. And it sat there for a little while. They were trying to figure out how to do it because I literally blow up like half of New York. It's an expensive movie to make. So I kind of felt that it just wasn't going to happen. And then one day I get a phone call from my agent. He's like, hey, Jennifer Garner likes this. I think she's going to do it. We have a couple of Zoom calls. Jennifer Garner is in. She's got what they call a first look deal with Netflix, which means that's the first studio of choice if she makes something. So they reached out to Netflix. Netflix liked the project. They greenlit a $100 million budget. They started talking to directors and writers and, the rest of the stuff. And it was all this came together inside of maybe 2 or 3 weeks. It was crazy fast. Then a week later, we get another phone call. Jennifer Garner has a scheduling conflict. She has to pull out. So that means Netflix goes away. The budget goes away. All these things go away. And we're right back to where we started from. So you just never know. So, I mean, from my standpoint, I just keep my head down and write the next book. I just feel it's a numbers game. Sooner or later, something is
It's going to fall in place. Yeah.
I mean, where does the contract get picked up? I would have thought a contract had been signed early on. So backing out is not happening. Where does the contract even start then?
A lot of the stuff, the negotiations, the talking, the pulling the different people together, that all happens without anything being in writing. Like once you solidify it, then it all, happens and you get contracts done. And yeah, at that point you can't step away. But like in this case, like these were just, Zoom calls. There were, meetings happening behind the scenes. It hadn't been papered yet. Fourth Monkey has been optioned over and over again. And, it takes a good year sometimes from the time they tell you they're going to option something before you actually have a signed contract. Because of all the negotiations back and forth, tweaking that particular agreement. So meanwhile, while that's going on, the phone calls and everything don't stop. You continue to work the project because everybody assumes the contract will eventually get done.
Oh my God.
So you just keep moving forward.
That's not even a life I'd want to live.
No,
it's just crazy.
Yeah.
No, I like when I get a phone call from my film agent, like half the time I don't want to answer the call because it's either going to be really good news or really bad news. There's no, in between with these guys.
Yeah. Yeah, I have a heartbreak story just, in this same, realm about 10, 12 years ago. I was trying to pitch my own paranormal show. And I was reaching out to production companies. I finally found one in New Orleans who was entertained about it. So we had our meetings and we got right to the end and they had me all, hook, line, and sinker. And then they're like, okay, well, you're going to have to fund it and stuff. And it was right at the end when the whole fund.
Yeah, I don't think I would ever stroke a check on the Hollywood side. I will take the phone calls. I will collect the option payments. But like when you get into the whole funding process, like that is a complete nightmare. And I've got friends that have been there, they get something, halfway done or they have a solid idea or even they get the entire film done. Then they do the festivals, trying to find distribution. Like the whole process just seems like a giant bottle of Pepto-Bismol. Like I don't I don't want that in my life. I don't need it.
That needs to be on a shirt. This feels like a bottle of Pepto-Bismol.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Oh, my God. So I don't want to, we're running out of time here. I don't want to hold you. I know you're busy, but we haven't yet talked about the drawing for your upcoming book.
So I always try to come up with something different to promote every book. I look at what everybody else is doing to promote every one of their titles, and then I try to come up with something that nobody's ever done before. So for this one, we've got a very unique situation. We've got a real haunted house on a real island. So I reached out to the people who own it, and we worked out a giveaway. So 1 month after publication, we're going to draw the name of one person. That person is going to be able to pick 3 of their friends, and we're going to bring them all to Newcastle, New Hampshire, or Kittery, where Wood Island is located. Put them on a boat, take them out to the island, and leave them there for 24 hours, basically in a haunted house on a private island. And then come back for them, and hopefully everybody's going to be okay. So if you've ever wanted to spend the night in a haunted house on a private island, this is the contest you want to get into.
That's kind of our dream.
Yeah, that's what we're trying to achieve here.
So let me ask you, because we've been in some places that are pretty remote and hard to get in and out. Is there a chicken exit for some of these guys that think that's going to be a good idea, then get there and realize they're in over their head? Or do they have to stick it out?
I wish I could say that there was, but like cell service out there is terrible, which is another thing. Nobody can explain why. There's 3 towns nearby, 3 towers, but cell service is terrible on the island. So we're going to give them a satellite phone. They're going to be able to call. But in a lot of ways, we're stuck based on the tides. Okay. There's tons of granite in the water. So you have to know exactly where you're going. And as the water gets lower, approaching low tide, you can't get out there at all. Trying to navigate that at night is extremely difficult. So, there are times of the day where it's physically impossible to get out there. So yeah, I would love to say we're going to be able to run out the second they decide that they don't want to be there anymore, but I don't think anybody's going to make that promise.
Hold on. We'll be back for you in like 8 hours.
Yeah. Yeah. So
Yeah, I mean, honestly, like if there was an emergency out there, like they would probably have to take him out by helicopter.
Yeah, I can see that. Yeah, for
probably,
sure.
yeah. So if we can get our way out to this coastal island, would you be open to letting our team investigate that location?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm inviting as many paranormal investigators out there that are willing to look at it. Because I feel there's something there, and like I think if somebody can actually capture what's there, somehow prove it, I think that would make me feel a lot better about it. But like it feels like there's something going on, and like we've just scratched the surface.
Right. That just I love new locations that we learn about. You know, I wasn't sure if this was a house that you had grown up in or grown up around, but complete tangent. How cool is it to say that you grew up at Crystal Lake?
It's funny. It comes up a lot, and it's funny because in today's world, a lot of people don't even
No.
know what
No,
Crystal
they
Lake
don't.
is.
Yeah.
Jason and all
Yeah.
that stuff is like it's gone. But yeah, Crystal Lake from the Friday the 13th movies had nothing to do with that. Like I forget where the actual movies were based, but they weren't based in Illinois.
Right.
We did have a guy that got killed because of it. So his girlfriend was babysitting, and he decided to put on a Jason mask and started first he was scratching on windows and knocking on the walls and things like that, and freaked her out. At one point, she opens the front door and he's standing there dressed like Jason, and she stabbed him a bunch of times with a pair of scissors.
I mean, it's his fault.
Oh man.
Yeah, no, it was totally his fault. It's like they kind of shied away from the whole Friday the 13th thing as much as they possibly could in that part of the world. I moved away from there when I was 13. My dad was a contractor, and he couldn't take those harsh winters in Illinois. So he moved us down to Florida.
Yeah. So before we end this, is there any last thing you want the audience to know? Any other projects you got going on? We talked about your new book.
I mean, working with James Patterson, he's kind of held my hand through his business model and taught me a lot about just the business side of things. I've got a ton of co-authored titles coming out. But the one we just talked about, Something I Keep Upstairs, that's my next big release. That's the one everybody wants to get.
Yeah.
And it's available for pre-order right now, right?
Yeah, you can pre-order it now. The actual release is May 13th. It's coming out through Simon & Schuster, hardcover, audiobook, all the different formats.
Good.
And we will post the method to register for the giveaway on our website and on our Patreon and on Instagram and all the areas. So we'll get that out as well.
Yeah. Well, JD, I appreciate you giving us the time. I loved hearing the stories and getting to talk to you. And I hope we get to see you out in that coastal island. We can get out there.
Yeah, absolutely. I'd love to get you guys out there.
Great.
That'd be fantastic. All right, guys. This has been JD Barker, our New York Times bestselling author. And I really suggest for the audience, if you like horror, if you like crime, pick up one of his novels and give it a shot, because Forsaken alone had me staying up late and being very tired at work. And if you've ever written software while you're tired, it doesn't work. All right, JD.
All right.
It's been a pleasure.
All right,
Thank you very much.
This has been an episode of Paranormal Patrol Podcast, Season 2, Episode 1. Don't forget to visit our website at www.hauntedorigins.com to learn how you can win an overnight stay in the infamous Wood Island, as read about in J.D. Barker's new book, Something I Keep Upstairs, releasing May 13th, 2025. Visit us on YouTube, Patreon, and all your standard platforms. Don't forget to hit subscribe.